So here we are at the end of the year. I'm sure you have all your resolutions all penned out and ready for the new day. We're at the end of the church year, and next Sunday is the first Sunday of Advent, and we begin a new church year at that point. And so we are at the end of things, talking about the end of things. In the liturgical traditions in North America, we refer to this Sunday as Christ the King Sunday. That has fallen a little bit out of favor in some circles. I've also heard the name Reign of Christ, which I actually think is kind of great too. But I think particularly as Christians in North America who can wake up out of a dead sleep with our opposition to the idea of a king, it's not a bad word for us to live with, even if it's just for a 12-minute sermon once a year, and kind of understand how that fits or does not fit us to this day. One of the things that I want to do is I want to go through the gospel reading in a little bit of detail, because there are a whole Bible's worth of verses that could be the central text for a day like today. But the gospel reading that we have of Pilate and Jesus is the one that is assigned. And so what does that tell us? What do we learn from this story? Whenever we hear the name Pilate, for most of us, I think it takes us to Holy Week, right? This is the only time we hear about Pilate is during Holy Week. And when we hear about it, it's this curious exchange, because out of all of the things to pull out of Holy Week, if we were to talk about Christ the King Sunday, it would be that gospel reading, you know the one, where Jesus kicks aside the stone in front of the tomb, kills Pilate, and slaughters the entire invading and occupying force of Romans. Right? That would be the obvious reading. Except that's not in the Gospels at all, right? Except for the important first part of that. Let's talk about the reading that we have. So Pilate, everybody's like, oh yeah, Pilate. He used to live next door, now he's... But do we know Pilate? Pilate is the Roman governor of that territory. This is an occupying force. This is an occupying government structure. Think we can pick on the English since it's Christ the King Sunday. Think of England in India. Or do we think of the United States in Iraq? Any number of points throughout history, we can think of occupying forces, their political and military structures to keep the occupation calm and going forward, right? You can imagine that the governor before Pilate steps down, and in Rome, Caesar is thinking, who do I send, right? Is this the big cash donor in the last election? I wasn't quite like that. But is this some embassy spot? No. This is a part of the world that is, I think the technical Greek term is hot mess. So it requires a certain kind of professional, shall we say. And after a lot of deliberation, Caesar reflects and says, you know what? I got a guy. Right? I got a guy. We're going to send Pilate. Pilate's immediate background to the stories of Holy Week is that he's a bruiser. He hurts people. He responds to traffic violations with violence. He puts down uprisings, and not in a, hey guys, come on, can we get along? In a, let's send more Roman troops than we need to sort of way. That's Pilate. Now, so is Pilate then the king? No, he's the governor. There is a king, and it's not Jesus. It's Herod. And Herod is a king in the sense that he's Jewish, he's the king of the Jewish people, and has all of the silverware and plates that say King of Israel. But that's it. He's not in charge of anything. He's there because the Romans said, yeah, sure, fine. Just keep everybody quiet. That's Herod. So Jesus shows up. Now notice this event. This is not, hey, it's Monday and Pilate and I get together for coffee and bagels every week on Monday just to catch up and see how things are going. No. Jesus is coming in handcuffed. He is on the spot. He is a captive. And there is a critical question that Pilate asks him. It's a question I recall from my mother from my childhood. What have you done? What have you done? Right? What's Pilate's job? Pilate's job is to keep a lid on things. He can't report back to Caesar, everything's great, Jerusalem is on fire, but otherwise things are good. No need to send more troops. No, his job is to keep a lid on things. And he asked Jesus, what have you done? Now that should cause us to think back to Holy Week, right? What have you done? Jesus has been preaching and teaching. He's been healing people who are sick or injured. He has been feeding people who are hungry. That's not why he's standing in front of Pilate. It's not because there were people in the Jewish leadership who said, this guy's Bible studies are way too good and somebody has to put a stop to it. That's not how you end up in front of Pilate in handcuffs. So let's think back to Holy Week, and in particular, the story that for whatever curious, strange, somebody should look into it sort of reason, is taken out of Holy Week and read somewhere else so that we don't read it at the same time. Jesus is in Jerusalem. So how does he get there? On a donkey, right? We know the story, Palm Sunday. So Jesus is coming in on the east side of Jerusalem, from the wilderness, you might say. It's where the bad weather comes from, the invading forces come from. Nothing good comes from the east, but Jesus comes in from the east. He sits on a donkey. People, thousands of people, who are in the city for Passover. This place is jam-packed. It is technically a powder keg, we would say, right? A place that Pilate's supposed to keep calm, but he knows too many people in Jerusalem for the Passover. Jesus comes in with thousands, and they are waving palm branches, which, fun, right? Palm branches. That were the flags of rebellion of the Maccabean revolt. So picture Pilate standing on his deck, looking out to the east and seeing this coming in and going, man, this is not how this weekend was supposed to go. But he planned ahead, because this was not his first Passover in Jerusalem. From the west would have been another parade coming in. In the front, on a horse, a commanding officer of Roman legions that had come down from Caesarea Maritima, the main point of embarkation for soldiers from Rome, who had come down on foot and were marching into Jerusalem to reinforce the soldiers that were there for this epic weekend. Well, still, how does this get us to Jesus being in front of Pilate? Well, let's go to the story that we don't read during Holy Week. Where does Jesus go with his thousands of followers? They're not all like locked up at hotel desks saying, what do you mean there's no room? It's not that kind of thing. They go to the temple. Now, if we pictured the United States and put Wall Street and the National Cathedral and all of our government buildings in the same place, and 1,000 people came in and occupied it in a way that shut down business, There are historical economists, which I just kind of love that that's a thing, who have said that as much as 50% of the economy of Jerusalem was related to the temple, let alone governance, let alone anything else. And Jesus has thrown a spike into the wheel. Shut it down. Not for 10 minutes, but for days. Days upon days shut down. Police standing around like, just let us know when you're done. What have you done? What have you done? Jesus was seen by Jewish leaders and Roman authorities as dangerous. That's why he was in front of Pilate. Not because his Bible studies were too good, not because he was healing people, not because of any other reason, but he was seen now as dangerous. It's curious to me in the Christian tradition that we don't tend to read that reading during Holy Week, when it seems like a linchpin part of the story. So now, Jesus is asked a bunch of questions here by Pilate, who's probably kind of curious about this thing, but is trying to, take his Advil and get through the weekend, and, these folks are angry and this sort of thing. But we get this king language, which is awkward for us, particularly in a North American context, because we had a whole war about kings, right? It's very, very difficult, and sometimes we don't like that language at all. Last year, when I was in Germany, when we were in a parish context, I realized that the very last Sunday of the year in Lutheran circles isn't even called Christ the King Sunday. In Lutheran circles, it has a different name, because Lutherans there don't observe All Saints Sunday. That's a Catholic thing, but they think it's really cool, so they want to have their own Sunday that has All Saints, but they don't call it All Saints. So it's called Ewigkeitssonntag, so Eternity Sunday, or Lutheran All Saints. I don't know if it's catching on as well, but it's the idea that counts. But over there, even the royalty piece is more awkward. You have all the von somebodies connoting royalty, but there is no royalty, and yet they're still there. What does it mean to have a king? There have been elements of the Christian tradition where we have moved in directions where we bring Jesus down to us, where we say, Jesus is my buddy. Jesus sat at the table with his friends, this kind of leveling of things. But if we look at the second half of the church year, which is about the life of the Christian, it's about our lives, the fact that we end on Christ the King Sunday is an emphatic pushback on that. It's a recognition that God is our creator and that we are God's creation. It's a reminder of place. And that reminder of place should be received by us as good news. I know sometimes you see little children who aren't given good boundaries, and it becomes very stressful for them to be in charge. That's the way it is for us. We get stressed when we have to be in charge of the whole universe. And understanding that Christ is King, that we are not, and that is a gift to us. The last thing that I want to leave with you is that as human beings, we have an idea of king that is not what Jesus is about. That's the last piece that I think is key. This idea of king as power over. There is now a king in Great Britain, right? Not a queen, a king. And you notice whenever they show up at official things, they're always wearing military uniforms. Because for human beings, power and force over others always is based on an understanding that one must have the power to diminish life or bring death, and that is what it means to have power. That is not what Jesus was about. It was brought up in one of our mission moments here a few weeks back. The verse on the altar here, "My grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness." It is in sacrificial service towards others that we reflect the reign of Christ to the world around us. So I would suggest this week, as you finish all of your year-end resolutions, that you think about this idea of our place relative to Christ the King, but at the same time, how that kingship is about grace, empathy, love towards others, a contrary model to our human ideas. Amen. Please stand as you are able.